I'm Nima Rajan. A full slate of cabinet ministers will be in Washington with Prime Minister Justin Trudeau later this week for the North American Leaders Summit. The list includes Global Affairs Minister Melanie Joly, Finance Minister Chrystia Freeland, International Trade Minister Mary Ng, and Public Safety Minister Marco Mendicino. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau will sit down with U.S. President Joe Biden and Mexican President Andrés Manuel López Obrador on Thursday at the White House. A Conservative senator from Saskatchewan is taking her criticism of Erin O'Toole to a bolder level. Denise Batters has started an online petition calling for a review of his leadership within 6 months. In a video accompanying the petition, Ms. Batters says the last federal election was lost because Canadians perceive Mr. O'Toole as untrustworthy. She added, quote, "You can't come back from that." Conservative Party President Rob Batherson has posted to Twitter that Ms. Batters' petition is not in order as it does not adhere to the party's constitution. RCMP in British Columbia say the body of a woman has been recovered from a mudslide across Highway 99 near Lillooet following historic rainfall. Police say search and rescue personnel are continuing to look for more people as the coroner's service also conducts an investigation. They say the total number of people and vehicles are not yet confirmed. Investigators have received reports of 2 other people reported missing. The public safety minister and emergency officials have an update scheduled for 3:30 p.m. Pacific time. Calgary is the latest Canadian city to declare a climate emergency. By a 13-2 margin, City Council voted last night to accept a recommendation to declare an emergency and to update Calgary's environmental plan to aim for net zero emissions by 2050. The council heard there are 517 municipalities in Canada that have already adopted similar measures. The 1,500-kilometer Trans Mountain pipeline has been temporarily shut down. Trans Mountain spokeswoman Ali Hounsel says construction on the Trans Mountain expansion project has been temporarily halted in the Lower Mainland, Hope, and Merritt regions due to prolonged rainstorms. Manitoba Hydro says a high debt load and falling export sales are behind its asking the provincial regulator to approve a 5% increase in electricity rates. The Crown Corporation is still dealing with debt from major construction projects, and export sales are being hurt this year by drought. There's no word yet on when the Public Utilities Board will hold hearings on the request. A team of engineers from Winnipeg has found the source of fuel in Iqaluit's water that left 8,000 residents without drinkable tap water since October 12th. The engineers believe the problem is an underground fuel tank built in 1962. Water testing has come back clean since October 24th, but the do not consume order won't be lifted until the Nunavut government does its own testing. NDP leader Jagmeet Singh is urging the federal government to pay for upgrades. Ontario Premier Doug Ford says his government will keep relying on local medical officers of health to reinstate pandemic restrictions as COVID-19 infections rise in the province. Health units covering Sudbury and the Algoma region in northern Ontario have introduced pandemic measures as cases spike. Mr. Ford says that local approach makes sense because the risk is lower than in previous infection waves now that more people are vaccinated. He says his government will also keep heeding the advice of the province's top doctor. Quebec is reporting 517 new cases of COVID-19 today and 2 more deaths attributed to the novel coronavirus. The 7-day average for new daily cases is 632. The province's Public Health Institute says about 90.9% of Quebecers aged 12 and older have received at least 1 dose of a COVID-19 vaccine, and 88.5% are considered adequately vaccinated. Quebecers aged 80 and up are eligible as of today to book appointments for 3rd doses of a COVID-19 vaccine. A new audit report from Oceana Canada says fisheries management has fallen short over the last 5 years, and nearly 1 in 5 fish stocks are critically depleted. The independent advocacy group says more than 80% of the critically depleted stocks lack the rebuilding plans needed to restore them to healthy levels. Of the 194 Canadian fish stocks examined, the audit lists 33 in critical condition and the health of 71 as uncertain. Newfoundland and Labrador's Central Health Authority says many services wiped out in the October 30th cyber attack have resumed. That includes medical imaging, laboratory services, and surgical services. Officials are confirming that hackers accessed some personal health information. We'll be right back. France will start building its first nuclear reactors in decades. That's part of its effort to meet its promises to reduce planet warming emissions. The announcement comes as many people across Europe are concerned about recent spikes in energy prices and the continent's dependence on global gas and oil producers. While France is more dependent than any other country on nuclear energy, its reactors are aging. Nuclear energy produces much lower emissions than coal, oil, or gas. However, nuclear plants are very expensive and time-consuming to build and produce radioactive waste that remains deadly for tens of thousands of years. The debate over nuclear energy's role in fighting climate change, though, is far from settled. And one person advocating for greater use of nuclear energy in Canada is Dr. Chris Keefer, the president of Canadians for Nuclear Energy. Dr. Keefer, welcome to Forum Daily.
Nima, it's a pleasure to be here.
So let's start with a brief overview of what exactly nuclear energy is and how it may benefit the fight against climate change and rising energy costs.
Yeah, so nuclear energy is fundamentally the splitting of an atom and I'm so sorry.
Please go ahead.
Yeah. So nuclear energy is fundamentally about splitting atoms and releasing a phenomenal amount of energy. Nuclear energy is 3 million times more dense than coal, and that really determines its environmental impact. So we need dramatically less mining, dramatically less land footprint for energy generation. And it's not controversial in the climate debate. It's something that's very proven. When we're talking about deep decarbonization, there's 8 large economies around the world that have achieved that standard in their electricity. And all 8 of those economies are either blessed with abundant hydro, like Quebec, for instance, or have some combination of nuclear plus hydro. Ontario is a stellar example of that. We've achieved the gold standard of deep decarbonization, and we should be very proud of that.
And we know nuclear energy was also a topic at the COP26 meeting. So what were the key takeaways from this discussion here?
Well, I was involved in a pretty interesting moment with our new Environment and Climate Minister, Mr. Gilbeau. And he was at an event that was called Powering the Coal Phase Out: A Just Transition for Workers, sponsored by one of the labor groups there. And I found it very ironic that he was at this meeting after having taken every opportunity in his 20 years as an environmental activist to oppose nuclear energy, where nuclear energy here in Ontario phased out coal. It provided 90% of the energy to get coal off of our grid in what has been called the greatest greenhouse gas reductions measure in North America. And it provided a just transition for those coal workers to move into the nuclear industry and have high-paying union intergenerational employment.
And we know there are some opponents to nuclear energy, as you mentioned. One of the concerns around nuclear energy is its safety, especially in light of Chernobyl and Fukushima. So is nuclear energy a safe alternative to traditional fossil fuels?
It's a lot like aviation, I would say. And Chernobyl was kind of the Hindenburg. There was a number of things that went wrong at Chernobyl. It had a lot to do with human factors. And so there's been a lot of learning. Modern reactors post-Chernobyl have a great safety record, despite something as terrible as Fukushima, where there were 3 meltdowns. The scientific consensus is quite clear on that. The United Nations Scientific Committee on the Effects of Atomic Radiation has looked carefully at Fukushima. No one has died as a result of radiation from Fukushima. 3 Mile Island as well. I'm a medical doctor. I do CTs and x-rays all the time. The largest dose to the public from 3 Mile Island was the equivalent of a single chest x-ray. So the dangers of nuclear energy have been really overhyped, and it's time to reevaluate that in light of the climate emergency, particularly as the evidence points out that the only successful deep decarbonizations are either when you have plenty of hydro or when you use nuclear.
All right, Doctor, just about a minute left here, but I want to jump to Canadian nuclear energy. We know you've been advocating for reversing the plans to close the Pickering nuclear plant in Ontario. So you have some concerns around the replacement plan for this plant. So tell us a little bit more about this.
Yeah, so it's not controversial. The IESO has told us that the plant will be replaced by gas. Currently, Ontario relies on gas for about 7% of its electricity. That will jump to 30%. It'll mean an additional 10 million tons of CO2 per year. and Canada's national emissions increasing by 1%, which goes to show just how powerful this form of energy is. Pickering basically powers the baseload needs of Toronto on a footprint the size of a Costco. So this is something that we cannot afford to do. We're losing 1/2 of the emissions gains from the coal phase out, again, the greatest greenhouse gas reduction in North American history. So it's something that I'm fighting and something that I think we really need to get behind.
All right, Dr. Keefer, thank you again for joining us today on Forum Daily.
You're very welcome.
Stay tuned. We'll be right back after the break with a look at the developing situation along the border between Russia and Ukraine. We'll have an interview with Dr. Balkan Devlin, Senior Fellow at the Macdonald-Laurier Institute when we come back. And of course, more news from around the world after that. So stay tuned. We'll be back after a short break. NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg is urging Russia to be more transparent about its military activities near Ukraine. But he stopped short of suggesting that Moscow might be preparing to invade Ukraine. Ukraine claims that Russia kept tens of thousands of troops and equipment near their common border after conducting war games earlier this year. Russia annexed Ukraine's Crimean Peninsula in 2014 and has backed a separatist insurgency in eastern Ukraine. Secretary General Stoltenberg appealed to Russia on Monday to help prevent escalations and reduce tensions. With us to help unpack the situation is Dr. Balkan Devlin, foreign policy expert and senior fellow at the Macdonald-Laurier Institute. Dr. Devlin, welcome to Forum Daily.
Thanks for having me.
So give us a quick update on the situation along the Ukraine-Russia border today.
So there's about 100,000 Russian troops that are massed on the border with Ukraine, as well as in the occupied Crimea. And this has been going on since April. So there were troop increases in the massing of troops in the border from April, and then there were Zapad exercises in early September that went through. But now what we are right now seeing is not only sort of a small increase in the number of troops from about 80,000 to maybe 100,000, but also positioning them in what one would consider a more offensive posture. And that is what is really, really troubling.
And we're seeing a lot of concerns around Russia's presence here. But Russia, at the same time, is saying allegations of an attack are inflammatory and has complained about actual NATO activity in the region. So let's dig in deeper here. Why is the North Atlantic Treaty Organization involved in the Black Sea region in the first place?
Well, first, there are 3 NATO members that are littoral states in the Black Sea: Turkey, Romania, and Bulgaria. And we do also have NATO partners such as Ukraine and Georgia that are in the Black Sea. So it is, in a way, Black Sea is a border, is an area that is of major concern for NATO. So that's number one. Number two is, of course, there are increasing sort of institutional ties and bilateral ties with different NATO members, including Canada, with Ukraine. For example, we do have a mission, Operation Unifier, that support military training in Ukraine. So it is a concern of what is going on over there for us too.
And Russia has been stepping on a lot of toes in terms of the Ukraine. It's been involved in a separatist insurgency in eastern Ukraine and annexed Crimea in 2014. So do you think a full-blown Russian invasion of Ukraine is likely, Doctor?
Two things, maybe to start with. The so-called insurgency is primarily Russian-directed and organized and supported by the Russian Federation. So those puppet regimes that they form up in Donbass, in eastern Ukraine, that are under occupation is very much sort of dependent on Russian support. Without that wouldn't be such a situation. Number two, when you look at the probability of a war, for the short term, maybe to the new year or around, I would say that is a low probability, maybe 5 to 10%, primarily because we do not see the specific sort of imminent signs of action coming from troop movements and so on and so forth. But in the longer term, say going over the winter and the spring, that there is 20 to 25%, 1 in 5 to 1 in 4 chance that there might be military action instigated by Russia, an invasion. Its extent to which is debatable and is concerning, but that's where we are.
All right, Doctor, just about a minute left here, but I want to jump to a letter you previously wrote to the Macdonald-Laurier Institute. Now, in this letter, you said that Russia poses a threat to international world order along with China. So some very strong words there, Doctor. Can you unpack these words for us, for our viewers here?
Sure. So there are basically two things that we need to be concerned about. Both China and Russia, as authoritarian regimes, would like to undermine the rules-based international order because those that particular set represents to them a threat to their regime. So they would like to reshape the rules-based international order to their liking that will make it safe for the authoritarian regimes in Beijing and Moscow. And therefore, they are engaging in subversion and political warfare against the Western countries, including election interference, including carrying out assassinations in the case of Russia, or naked territorial aggression, as in the case of Russia, when they do invade Ukraine and illegally annex Crimea in 2014. So their presence and their constant undermining of the order represents a threat to that international order and to Canada, which very much benefited from a stable, rules-based international order.
All right, Dr. Devlin. We'll be right back, everyone. Stay tuned. Germany's network regulator says it has suspended its procedure to certify the operator of a new pipeline that would bring Russian gas to the country under the Baltic Sea. Construction of the Nord Stream 2 pipeline was completed earlier this year, but it's not yet operating. Both Ukraine and the United States have opposed the project. The German network regulator said on Tuesday that it was suspending the procedure to certify Nord Stream 2 AG as an independent transmission operator. Analysts say the move increases the likelihood that the pipeline won't start up in time to help alleviate tight natural gas supplies in Europe. 4 men detained under terrorism laws have been released by British detectives investigating a homemade bomb explosion in a Liverpool taxi on Sunday. Police have named the suspected bomber as a 32-year-old man who came to Britain as an asylum seeker several years ago and had converted to Christianity. He is believed to have brought the explosive device into the taxi and was later killed in the blast. Police have called the blast a terrorist act, but are still working to determine the motive. 2 explosions have rocked Uganda's capital, Kampala, killing at least 3 civilians in what police described as a coordinated attack by extremists. Police said 3 suicide bombers also died in the blasts in Kampala. The Islamic State group has claimed responsibility for the explosions. Police spokesperson Fred Anunga blamed the bomb blasts on an extremist group known as the Allied Democratic Forces. He said Kampala is still threatened by other suicide bombers. The twin blasts occurred within 3 minutes of each other. The Qatar-based satellite news network Al Jazeera says Sudanese authorities have released its bureau chief. This was 2 days after he was detained in the African country. The network said on Twitter that its journalist was freed on Tuesday. Sudanese security forces arrested the reporter on Sunday. This was following a raid on his home in the capital of Khartoum. That came a day after thousands of pro-democracy protesters took to the streets across Sudan to rally against the military's coup last month. The Human Rights Office of the United Nations is citing reports that authorities in Ethiopia have detained at least 1,000 people. This is under a state of emergency the government declared this month, which came after a brutal year-long war with rival Tigray forces. A spokesperson for the Office of the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights said on Tuesday that Ethiopian authorities have often detained people on suspicion of being affiliated to or supporting the Tigray People's Liberation Front. She says the state of emergency risks compounding an already very serious human rights and humanitarian situation. Health workers in Belgium who don't want to get vaccinated against COVID-19 will face losing their jobs. Belgium's federal government has finalized a draft bill to make vaccination of healthcare workers mandatory. It comes amid a surge of new coronavirus cases and deaths. Hospitals in Belgium now reserve half of their ICU beds for COVID-19 patients. Starting January 1st, healthcare workers will have a 3-month window to get their shots. Beginning in April, workers without a proper justification for their refusal could be dismissed. Associations representing restaurants and catering businesses in Greece are holding strikes and work stoppages across the country today. They are seeking renewed financial relief from the government due to the effects of the pandemic. Greece is reporting its highest daily number of confirmed COVID-19 infections since the start of the pandemic, prompting the government to reimpose some restrictions. A longtime Trump ally, Steve Bannon, turned himself in to the FBI, and then he appeared before a Washington judge yesterday to face federal contempt charges. This was for defying a subpoena from a House committee investigating January's insurrection at the U.S. Capitol. But Mr. Bannon did not enter a plea and is due back in court on Thursday. The 67-year-old, who was indicted Friday on 2 counts of criminal contempt, said outside court that he would be taking on the Biden regime in fighting the charges. Turkey's state-run news agency says authorities have issued a 40-day temporary custody order for a man considered a suspect in the July assassination of Haitian President Jovenel Moïse. Businessman Samir Handel was detained at the Istanbul airport, where he arrived while traveling from the United States to Jordan. His arrest was announced by authorities in Haiti yesterday. All right, that'll do it for your look at national and international news for today. Remember, for news on demand, you could always visit our website, thenewsforum.ca, and follow our social media handles on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. You could also watch all of our commentary, programming, and interviews on the News Forum YouTube channel. Take care, Canada. We'll see you next time.